everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Blake, or as your children would call me, Teacher Blake. I'm one of the teachers at QED. I mainly do creative writing, but also literature and English as well. And today we are going to be going through all of our different English courses that we offer. And we're going to give just a small rundown on each of those classes, let you know a little bit of what each of them is all about, how to tell what level your child is at, English speaking wise, and which course they might like to do. We have some kids that do multiple courses, that do some of the reading classes and some of the literature classes. We have kids that just do one. So what we'll do is we'll go through all of those with you today. If you have any questions at any point, please don't be afraid to put them in the Zoom chat. I myself or one of my colleagues will help answer any questions you might have. If there are any questions that might be a little bit more detailed, do please put them in the chat, but we might answer them after the presentation. So any and all questions are welcome. Feel free to please just shoot them away in the chat. Okay. Let's begin. Oh, I should let you guys know that the chat should be about 45 minutes, maybe an hour. I know that some of you are currently waiting in line for PCR testing, so hopefully I will offer some entertainment for you while you wait. But let's get started anyway. Okay, how to choose the most suitable English course for your children. Let's begin. Oh, why is this not? There we go. Okay, so there are two kinds of English learners in my experience, and I think in everyone's experience. The first kind are your native English speaking students. Those are, of course, kids that already speak English fluently. Maybe they learned it as a first language. Maybe they have been speaking English since they were a baby. They speak English quite well, and they've done so for most of their lives. So that's your first kind of learner. Your next kind of learner is your ELLs, what we call English language learners. Now, these are kids or people or adults who are learning English as their second language, and maybe they're a little bit older or they're coming to it completely new. They've already learned a different language. Maybe it's Mandarin or Cantonese, and that's what they use to communicate at home or at school. But now they maybe want to learn English as their second language. But it's important to remember as teachers, pardon me, also I have a bit of a cold. It's important to remember as teachers that just because a student might be struggling with their English, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are a slow learner overall. It's just that they're learning a completely new language, and that means learning new verbs, new tenses, new conjugations. It's an entirely new mode of thinking. And so it's important for myself and my fellow teachers to always remember that, in particular, English language learners are coming at this from a completely different culture, a completely different background. And so I myself like to remember that and come into my lessons with that in mind so that we can sort of tailor the experience of learning English to the student individually. So those are our two different kinds of learners. So I hope you're already sort of thinking about where your kids might be among these two groups. So how do we learn a language? If whether you are an ELL or you're an English primary speaker, there are two ways of learning a language, any language, whether it be English or French, Swahili, it doesn't really matter. You have your acquisition, which is just your picking up of the language through listening, through speaking, engaging. That's what you would get if you wanted to learn French, so you moved to Paris, right? And then you're living in Paris for 1 or 2 years, and as you're going to the supermarket or going to school, you're speaking the language and sort of learning it as you go. Your second kind of way of learning is language learning, which is your traditional, through a textbook. Here is English, here are your verbs, here are your adjectives, let's conjugate, that kind of thing. The type of language learning you would get in a classroom at school, for example. Now at QED, we primarily offer 4 different courses. One of those courses focuses on the second type, the green language learning, which is like a very structured, traditional way of learning English, which is perfect for some kids. Our other 3 courses are primarily acquisition-based, which means we try and create environments in which kids are using the language organically and using it as though they were in the country themselves. I find that there are pros and cons. There's benefits and downsides of both kinds. But for the most part, acquisition is always a useful tool, because that's how you're going to get your more conversational English, right? It's hard to nail down conversational English through a textbook. Much easier to do so when you're actually conversing with each other in a classroom of students working on writing stories or reading a book together. So those are your two ways of learning. Now, how do we learn a new language? It's worth noting here just for a moment. I found out just before the presentation that the Chinese font on these slides might look a little bit funny, might look a little strange. That was just in the conversion from to a PDF. It switched the font for some reason. So I apologize if the font is coming across a little bit strange. I hope it's legible for everybody. So how do we learn a language? This is sort of continuing on that thought of acquisition versus language learning. Now, not all children need the same types of instruction. Some people might respond better to your traditional textbook learning. Some people might respond better to a conversational style, right? But what they need depends very much on which stage in their English journey they're on, what level they're at. So it's difficult to teach English by only teaching the rules, right? If I just come up to you and I try and explain specifically how to do proper complex sentence structure, how to conjugate your verbs, right? How to use your past participles. You're going to be very good at doing English as though it were math, right? But if we want to ensure that students improve rapidly in a more organic sense, we want to make sure we provide an engaging, language-rich, supportive, culturally respectful is important to me, and meaningful classroom experience. And so that's what I personally try and foster, and what we try and foster in all of our classes at QED. We try and make sure that the environment of the classroom is one of collaboration, one of respect, one of fun. We try and have a good time, because I think it's very important to, particularly when doing literature and writing, it's very important to be having a good time so that your creativity can organically produce content, right? And I think that if you're organically producing content, that is when you're going to most easily be able to engage with a language. Because when you're at your most creative, I think that's when you're at your most relaxed. And when you're at your most relaxed, I think that's when we can input data into our brains and learn a language in the best way. So as is noted up here at the beginning, there are different stages of language acquisition, which we'll be going through in just a second. So how do we find out what your child needs? How do we find out what stage they're in? Now, even though people don't fit into boxes, it's hard to say Jimmy should go into this class and Betty should go into this class. It's important to remember that language learning is a very fluid process. Some days are going to be better than others. Some concepts are going to stick easier than others. It helps to understand that there are different stages of language acquisition, how we take in data, right? And it's once you understand these different stages, it might become easier to assess where your child is, and so that it's easier for you to pick an according class that they might fit into best, that they might slot into in the most organic way. You're going to hear me use this word organic a lot, and I think that organic teaching is a very important piece of learning a language, because a language, hopefully, once you're at your stage where you're speaking it fluently, it should be as organic as holding onto a pen, right? It should be organic. It should feel natural. You shouldn't have to think about it. It should be as organic and natural as breathing. And so I think that it's most important to create that sense of organic feel in a classroom so that the end goal is matched by the teaching, if that makes sense. So what are those different stages of language acquisition? How can you help figure out which level your child is currently at? Well, there's this guy named Krasher, and in the 90s, he created these stages of language acquisition, and there are 5 of them. So we're going to go through each of them now. I'll just go through them very briefly, but after the presentation, we will be providing all of you with copies of some of these pages so that you can go through them on your own in your own time as well. So I'll be giving a very surface level introduction to each of these stages, and then we'll be moving on to the courses that we have on offer, okay? So our first stage Now, this is called the pre-production stage, as you can see on the left. Now, what you're looking at here in this graph, because it's not very well labeled, that's my fault. On the left, you have what stage we're talking about. The next column over is what you can expect from a child that is at that level. The next column over is what sort of range in their English learning journey you can expect them to be at. And then the final column is what you can expect as a teacher, what things you can do to help students that are at this stage. So in our first stage, our pre-production stage, this takes place usually around 0 to 6 months of English learning, okay? In this stage, your child might be quite silent and doesn't really speak in class, which makes sense because they don't know the language yet, right? They might be able to parrot English speakers back. That means repeat what someone says to them. So if I ask your child to say, "I am thirsty," they might be able to say back to me, "I am thirsty," but they don't necessarily understand what they're saying yet. So in this stage, they'll listen lots, and they'll do lots of writing of words to try and get used to the shapes. And they'll do lots of shaping of sounds, because in English and in any language, there are going to be sounds that feel very different to what we're used to in our common tongue, right? So at this phase in pre-production, as a teacher, we might ask students to point, touch, or do lots of talking with their hands, right, to help us understand each other. We might provide listening experiences for them where they have to listen to short stories on tape. We might pair them with an English-speaking student who is at a higher level so that they can help communicate in an easier way. And we might help them build their vocabulary through lots of physical responses like "I'm thirsty" or "I'm hungry." Okay, so that is our first phase of the 5. Our second phase is called early production. Now, this usually takes place between 6 months and 1 year, so the next half year of development. Now, your child might be able to speak 1 or 2 word chunks. "Hi, teacher. How are you? I'm fine," right? These types of things. "I'm sad. I'm hungry." These kinds of sentences. They might also use memorized phrases, right? But might not always get it correct. So we have an example here that says, "May I get a drink of water?" So they might not get every word right. They might say, "May I get drink water," or something like that. But they're getting there, they're getting there. And they can probably produce short sentences with present tense verbs. So at this stage, we can expect them to be talking in the present tense. "I walk my dog," right? But we're not quite at the phase of "I walked my dog" or "I will be walking my dog." That will come later. Things we can do in this stage as a teacher is we can ask yes or no questions. We can get students to try and answer preferential questions like, what is your favorite color? What is your favorite animal, right? We're not quite at the why stage because it would be difficult for a child in the early production phase to answer, "I like elephants because they're big and remind me of my grandma." I don't know. Whereas they can probably say, "My favorite animal is an elephant." We'll provide them with comprehensive listening activities. So the stories might be getting a little bit more complicated now because we can trust that a student will follow along and understand a lot more of the verbs, a lot more of the pronouns, a lot more of the prepositional phrases, so on and so forth. And we might start using pictures much more in work. So we're moving away now from using our hands to communicate, and we're moving now towards the page. We want to start connecting words to pictures. Our third phase is speech emergence. So now between 1 and 3 years, this is a big jump now. This is a long part of the journey. Students can now speak simple sentences. "May I go to the washroom?" "When will class be finished, Teacher Blake?" "Teacher Blake, why is your hair so messy?" is one that I sometimes get. Maybe they can understand a lot of what I'm saying at this point. They make grammatical errors when speaking and writing, but it's much easier to let them know what those errors are and help them to correct them, right? And at this stage, they're likely still probably pronouncing words incorrectly, but that's okay because it's very much a journey, right? So at this phase, we'll do things with students like put them into groups and have them do very short, condensed conversations with each other, maybe talking about what they did that day or what their favorite thing to do on the holiday is. They'll provide short paragraphs, written paragraphs. They'll use graphic organizers and word banks to help them study. We'll provide them with writing activities and response journals to books they might be reading, and so on and so on. So as you can see, I hope, there's a very natural progression going on here of, a level of acquisition, right? We want them to never feel overwhelmed by what they're doing. We want them to come in at the level that they feel comfortable at, or maybe a little bit under the level so that they feel pushed. But we never want them to come in when they're above a certain level and they're being slowed down. That's not to say that it's never good to review. Reviewing is always good. And I think in a very real sense, one of the most important and valuable parts of all of our courses is that they are repetitive. They come weekly, right? And that means that a student is constantly having to engage with a separate language, because no matter how good of an English speaker you become, if you don't speak it for a year, you're going to forget certain things. You're going to forget certain pronunciations. You're going to forget certain ways of conjugating verbs. So it's this repetition, regardless of which stage, regardless of which level. That's one thing to note. And our final stage is now advanced fluency. So you might already know what this means. This is 4 to 7 years or longer. Again, it's not a solid boxed out rubric. Some people will take 5 years to become fluent in a language. Some people will take 10. Some people will take 15. But as long as they are continuously trying and continuously engaging, they will get there. You just can't guarantee how quickly somebody will get there because that depends on the person, right? Regardless, we've got this range of about 4 to 7 years here to get to advanced fluency. Students are now near native in their ability to speak and use English in content areas or with academic language, so they can read textbooks now. And they will still need continued support with academic learning, right? And this is what I'm talking about here when I say this constant engagement, because no matter what level they get to, it's not like riding a bike. If you learn to ride a bike when you're 10 and then you don't ride a bike again until you're 35, you'll still be able to ride that bike, right? Whereas with language, it's a little bit different. If you don't use it, it's very possible you'll lose it, right? You want to make sure you're consistently utilizing that part of your brain, working out that muscle, almost like you're doing weights, right? You want to constantly be using. So even if your student or your child, pardon me, gets to this advanced fluency stage, it's important that they're still engaging in the language so that they're working out that muscle, getting it nice and ripped, getting it nice and strong so that they can do pull-ups with their language. So what do we do for students in this stage to help them work out that muscle? We provide rich and engaging instructions based on standards and grade level content expectations. So this is the level where we might be talking about helping your child apply for UK universities or American or Canadian universities, right? This is where we might be helping your child to write complex essays on a topic, right? Aside from simply having an opinion, we want them to now be able to argue that opinion in a different language, right? Because that's important. That's when you know that you've reached a fluency stage, is when you're not only able to say sentences, but then argue complex feelings behind said sentences. So we'll continue to contextualize language for them in that way. And we'll also provide English language development tailored to each individual student needs. If one student is struggling with prepositions and another student is struggling with argumentative phrasing, right? We will work with that student in an engaged, directed way, right? Depending on where they need help, right? These students are considered long-term English learners now, and they might struggle in very specific contact areas, but that doesn't mean that they're not excelling in other areas, right? Language learning is always a constant journey. That's why they're coming out with new editions of the dictionary every year, right? It's because things are changing. Languages evolve as the times change. Okay, I'll pause here for just a second because that was a lot. Does anybody have any questions about any of those stages or anything revolving around what we've spoken about so far? I'll just give everyone a minute. I want everyone to notice my new mug. It's a fox, and I'm very proud of it. Extremely pleased with this mug. Okay. So let's get on to the meaty bits now, the good bits. Now we've had a little bit of a lesson. All of you have officially been taught by Teacher Blake now on the stages of language acquisition and the importance of recognizing what stage or level or type of learner your child or you might be. So now what courses do we offer? What do we offer as a company? Here we go. We've got 4 different courses on offer, plus a couple of extras that we'll talk about at the end. But primarily, we'll go through each of these 4 classes together right now. And again, if you have any questions at any point, please let me know. What we're going to be doing is I'll give a very brief overview of each course, and then we're actually going to watch a video that shows you that course being taught. Teacher Blake might make an appearance at some point, but I'll keep that as a surprise for now. Okay, our first course is our guided reading club. Now this course, it will help pupils cultivate an interest in reading by reading enjoyable stories aloud. So it makes a lot of sense. It's guided reading. We're going to pick books and stories that are very fun and engaging, and we are going to get students to read them aloud together. Now it'll be led by a teacher. I do this class on occasion, and the teacher, myself, will assist with vocabulary and comprehension. So as the students are reading, we might pause at certain places, dissect a sentence, see what's being done with a verb, see what's being done with a pronoun, discuss vocabulary. What does this word mean? Can you use it in a different sentence? So on and so on and so on. You don't need to worry too much about what level your child is at for the guided reading club, because it will be tailored depending on what level your child is at. If we have a group of 6 to 8 pupils who are in the advanced fluency stage, we can read some pretty advanced books. But if we have a group of students that are at a lower level, we can read some more introductory books, right? So it's very much dependent on what level your child is at. These are taught 3 times a week during term time, and we do them daily during holidays. So it's very consistent during term time. Here is a small graphic that is in Chinese so that some of you, if you have any questions, it might be answered on this graphic. I'll leave this on the screen for just a moment here so that everybody has a chance to look. But once again, this page will be provided to all of you, so you can look through it on your own after the presentation if you like, okay? The types of books that we might cover in this are things like Roald Dahl's BFG, Charlotte's Web, Horrid Henry. The Magic Treehouse is one that we did just recently, which is a super fun book series. One that I actually read when I was in 2nd grade. So it has a very close, it's very close to me and my heart. But those are the types of books that we would read in this class. But again, these aren't the only books we read. If we have a group of students who all really want to read, I don't know, The Tale of Despero, maybe, we can do that, right? We can do that. It's very much an organic, there's that word again, fluid process. It's a conversation between the teacher and the students and the parents, right? Because we want these courses to be as enjoyable and organic as possible for the kids. We don't want to force stories that they're not interested in down their throats. We want them to be enjoying what they're reading so that they are engaging with the content and so that they feel motivated to learn more of the language so they can better understand that content, right? So here is a small video, short video of the BFG being taught, okay? Here we go. Hopefully sound will work. I think it should. Can everybody hear this?
With all the patience of a small girl who has something important to wait for, Sophie sat motionless on the windowsill. How much longer, she wondered. What time do queens wake up? Faint stirrings and distant sounds came to her from deep inside the belly of the palace. Then, all at once, beyond the curtains, she heard the voice of the sleeper in the bedroom. It was a slightly blurred sleep talker's voice. "Oh no," it cried out. "No, don't. Someone stop them. Don't let them do it. I can't bear it. No, please stop them. It's horrible. Oh, it's ghastly. No, no, no." This is how the Queen speaks. She speaks with this posh voice. If you've ever heard her. Okay. She is having the dream, Sophie told herself. It must be really horrid. So horrid just means horrible, yeah? Nasty. I feel so sorry for her, but it has to be done. After that, there were a few moans. Then there was a long silence. Sophie waited. She looked over her shoulder. She was terrified that she would see the man with the dog down in the garden staring up at her. But the garden was deserted. Deserted just means empty, yeah? A pale summer mist hung over it like smoke. It was an enormous garden, very beautiful, with a large, funny-shaped lake at the far end. There was an island in the lake, and there were ducks swimming in the water. Inside the room, beyond the curtains, Sophie suddenly heard what was obviously a knock on the door. She heard the doorknob being turned. She heard someone entering the room. "Good morning, Your Majesty," a woman was saying. It was the voice of an oldish person. So oldish just means quite old. There was a pause and then a slight rattle of china and silver. So china is like cups and things, yeah? Things that cups are made out of, porcelain. "Will you have your tray on the bed, ma'am, or on the table?" "Oh, Mary, something awful has just happened." This was a voice Sophie had heard many times on radio and television, especially on Christmas Day. It was a very well-known voice. So in England, every Christmas, the Queen does a speech, yeah? It's called the Queen's Christmas message, I think. "Whatever is it, ma'am? I've just had the most frightful dream. It was a nightmare. It was awful." "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, but don't be distressed. You're awake now and it will go away. It was only a dream, ma'am." "Are you real?" the Queen said to Sophie. Yes, Your Majesty," Sophie murmured. "What is your name?" "Sophie, Your Majesty." "And how did you get up onto my windowsill?" "No, don't answer that. Hang on a moment. I dreamed that part of it too. I dreamed that a giant put you there." "He did, Your Majesty," Sophie said. The maid gave a howl of anguish and clasped her hands over her face. So anguish means distress, yeah? Or being upset, yeah? "Control yourself, Mary," the Queen said sharply. Then to Sophie she said, "You are not serious about the giant, are you?" "Oh, yes, Your Majesty. He's out there in the garden now." "Is he indeed?" the Queen said. The sheer absurdity of it all was helping her to regain her composure. "So he's in the garden, is he?" she said, smiling a little. "He is a good giant, Your Majesty," Sophie said. "You need not be frightened of him." "I'm delighted to hear it," the Queen said, still smiling. "He's my best friend, Your Majesty." "How nice," the Queen said. "He's a lovely giant, Your Majesty." "I'm quite sure he is," the Queen said. "But why have you and this giant come to see me?" "I think you have dreamed that part of it too, Your Majesty," Sophie said calmly. That pulled the Queen up short. It took the smile right off her face. She certainly had dreamed that part of it. She was remembering now how, at the end of her dream, it had said that a little girl and a big friendly giant would come and show her how to find the 9 horrible man-eating giants. But be careful, the Queen told herself. Keep very calm, because this is surely not very far from the place where madness begins. Okay?
Oops.
"I don't see any giant," the Queen said. "Please wait," Sophie said. "Shall I take her away now, ma'am?" the maid said. "Take her downstairs and give her some breakfast," the Queen said. 24 feet tall, wearing his black cloak with the grace of a nobleman, still carrying his long trumpet in one hand, he strode magnificently across the palace lawn towards the window. The maid screamed. The Queen gasped. Sophie waved. The BFG took his time. He was very dignified in his approach. So dignified means he was very, respectable, yeah? So he moves in a very respectable way. When he was close to the window, where the 3 of them were standing, he stood and made a slow, graceful bow. His head, after he had straightened up again, was almost exactly level with the watchers at the window. So there we see him walking over. "Your Majesty," he said, "I is your humbug servant." What is he trying to say there? When he says your humbug servant, what does he mean? Does anyone know? What do you think, Alice?
I think he's saying you're very honest servant.
Yeah, in the past, people used to say humble servant. This was a phrase. So people would say, I'm your humble servant. So humble means kind of modest, or sort of it's like the opposite of arrogant. Yeah, not arrogant. So when he says, I am your humbug servant, he means I am your humble servant, which is an old-fashioned phrase people used to use. He bowed again.
Okay, so that is, whoops, hold on. How do I, there we go. I'll go back to this slide for a second. Now, that was a wonderful video of one of our teachers doing the guided reading. I want to point out that this video primarily showed the teacher reading, but in an hour-long session, typically the teacher will read for about half of that time or 3/4, and the students will read for the other half of the time or the quarter of the time. The teacher will do a majority of the reading because that will allow the students to listen and read along, and also be able to ask questions while the reading's going on, right? But then, of course, we don't want them to feel overwhelmed, so we're not going to make them read for an hour, but we might get your child, if they're in a group of 6, they might read for 5 or 10 minutes per session out loud at their own pace. And depending on the child and how they're doing or how they're feeling about it, we might let them read a little bit more or a little bit less, very much dependent on the child. So that is our guided reading club. Whoops, that music, my goodness. Our next course is our intensive reading club. So whereas the guided reading club is more of an introductory level, the intensive reading club, we're going to be reading more advanced novels now, or even maybe looking at poems, more advanced poems. So this will help pupils form reading habits, as opposed to just coming to class and reading 3 times a week in class. This will help them read on their own as well. On top of the reading that they'll have to do on their own, they'll also be assigned reading tasks. So this will not just hopefully help them to develop a reading rhythm, right? A sort of a want to read more often, but it will also help them to be more engaged while reading, because if you have questions you have to answer, it forces you to retain, engage with, and have a conversation with the text in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be having. So this will hopefully, this class will develop pupils' reading strategies through intensive in-class reading, as well as solo reading they'll be doing on their own. Similar time frame as the guided reading, 3 sessions per week during term time, daily sessions during the holiday, but these are all very customizable depending on what works for you or the student. Okay, 4 to 6 people per class. Here is a slide with this information so everybody can have a quick read through that. The type of stories that might be read in this level of class would be, we're now talking about more advanced books like Harry Potter or The Diary of Anne Frank, which is a very advanced, War Horse. The Tale of Despero would probably fit into this category, or even Number the Stars. So there are some stories that cover a lot of historical things as well. The fun thing about doing any reading class with your child is that not only will they be practicing their language, but in the example of a story like on the next page here, The Diary of Anne Frank, right, for example, they're also going to be learning a lot about history, right? In Harry Potter, of course, it's a story about wizards and magic, but they're also going to be learning a lot about English and British culture, right? So the cool thing about these classes is it's sort of a 2 birds for 1 stone situation. If any of you aren't familiar with that phrase, it is an idiom. This is a little lesson, actually. I'm going to type this in the chat. An idiom, an idiomatic phrase, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, means that you're getting, if you throw 1 stone, instead of just hitting 1 bird, you're hitting 2 with 1. So you're getting more value for your effort. And so that's what I mean here when I say 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only is your student or your child, I keep calling your children students, not only is your child going to be learning English, there's your first bird, but they'll also be learning some history as well, which will be your second bird, all for the one class. 2 birds with 1 stone. These are other kinds of books they might read depending on level, right? Again, this class is tailored to the level of the student. So if they're at their advanced stage, that's where we're going to be reading like older books like A Christmas Carol, right? Or How to Train Your Dragon, which isn't so old, but it's a tougher read. If they're in an earlier phase, they might be reading things like Charlotte's Web, the BFG, right? Magic School Bus. These are just some examples of books that we have done in the past. But again, this is growing every year because we have students that have been with us for years and they're very well read. So sometimes we read books that just came out, for example, or newer books. And we have an example of this class as well. And this is a reading of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. This is actually a story that's being taught in one of my creative writing classes right now. 2 of my creative writing classes, actually. Here we go. Love that music.
Well, yes, this technique, it gives each character a larger than life, almost a mythical feel. For example, many famous musicians and actors, they use stage names for the same reason, to make their name larger than life. Okay. Now, in Britain, we still have a class system. Yeah, children born to upper class.
I'm going to pause here just for a second to point out something that might be obvious to some of you. In this class, we dive a lot deeper into, it's less so about the surface level vocabulary, right? And learning synonyms and what words mean, and more so about diving into deeper literary devices. So at this level, the student will likely have, you can read the same book. For example, you can do BFG in the guided reading and focus and read it with a focus on vocabulary and pronunciation. You could also do BFG in the in this version, in this class, the intensive reading, but focus more so on literary devices and sentence structure, right? And more sort of with all of these classes, you could hypothetically take the same book and teach them in every class, but it would be a very different experience because depending on the class, you would focus on a very different thing. Okay, so notice that what is being taught about here with David is more so the deeper meat and potatoes of the language, as opposed to the surface level garnish, if you want to use a metaphor. Okay, let's continue.
So rich families, they have advantages over working class families. And we see this throughout the novel between Harry and Dudley, the opportunities, the advantages that Dudley has compared to Harry. Now, Potter, it's quite a common working class name. A potter is a person who makes pottery. Now, pottery, of course, it's a very useful job. It's practical, it's creative. We all need pots and glasses and ceramics. So it's a very useful, it's a very practical, it's a common working class name. And as you said, Harry is also a very common name. So we have Harry, who's very down to earth, he's very practical, he's useful. Now, on the other hand, Dursleys is a village or a small town in Gloucestershire in England. Now, many, many, many years ago, Dursley was an important trading town, hundreds of years ago. But today, it's not important. It's just a tiny little town. So this kind of reflects the Dursleys' feeling. They think they are important. They think they are special, but they're not. It's Harry who is special. So Harry, with the common, ordinary name, here's the special one. Okay? Whereas Petunia, Vernon, Dudley, these are quite uncommon names. These are upper class names. I don't know anyone called Petunia, Vernon, and Dudley. Maybe if I was rich, maybe I would know people by these names, but I don't. Okay? So yes, Harry, very down to earth, working class, common, friendly name. Whereas Vernon, as we said, it sounds like vermin or venom. Okay, it's not a friendly name. Dudley is a dud. It doesn't work. And Petunia, of course, I mean, there's many very pretty names for flowers like lily, rose, daisy. Petunia, it's a flower, but it doesn't sound a very pretty or very nice name for a flower so much. Okay, so already we're learning a lot about these characters just from their names. Thank you very much. So we've jumped to the end of the chapter. We've already set up this idea of we've got this evil character Voldemort. We've got this very good, very strong counter in Dumbledore. And in the middle, we've got everybody else. We've got wizards and muggles. And then suddenly this is our first sighting of Harry. Okay, so question. Can you think of any other people or fictional characters who were orphaned? An orphan is a person who has lost both parents, but grows up to be very famous and or very powerful. Can anyone think of any other characters or famous people? Yes, Chiyu.
I just want to say, because I read the whole Harry Potter book, it looks like the Voldemort himself was also an orphan.
Aha, okay, interesting point. Yes, we'll come back to that on another lesson, Tom Riddle. But how about outside the Harry Potter movies? Think of superheroes.
I don't
Any superheroes?
Percy Jackson.
Famous superheroes. Flies through the air.
I think it's Superman.
That was a bat. Sorry.
Wait,
That's a duff.
do you mean Superman?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Yes, so Superman is an orphan. He arrives on this planet.
Okay, I think we've seen enough of this video here. Basically, what you can see, hopefully, is that this dives into a lot more detail of the text. Okay, we're not just talking about what's going on in the story. We're talking about actual literary tools being used in the writing of the story. And so this is where you see it would require a certain higher level of English comprehension in order to be able to discuss the deeper meaning of words or what's being done with those words, right? Okay, so once again, I'll go back to this page so everybody can have a quick little view through this as I'm talking. Once again, regardless of the book you choose, you can go into detail. Something that's very interesting that I learned while doing my master's degree is children's literature. We're not talking about children's literature like Roald Dahl. I'm talking the books your 2, 3, 4-year-old might read, big picture books. The amount of psychology that goes behind those kinds of stories is massive. I took a whole course in college about children's literature, and the amount of science and effort and study that goes behind every single word, how those words are put together. We're talking about using, certain phrasatory sentences that will put stresses on syllables in a very particular way to help with a kid's repetitive memory, right? Because we have a much easier time singing songs and remembering song lyrics, for example. Whereas, anyway, this is something that I'm interested in children's books. That's something that's often very much discussed by the editor, is how can we organize these words and sentences in such a way that a student isn't just reading it and getting a fun story, but they're also going to be able to remember it based on the sounds of the words, right? It's very interesting stuff, very interesting. I highly recommend doing some research on your own about it. Okay, that music, I'm gonna hear that music in my dreams. Okay, EFL is our next course. Now, you might remember when I talked about there were 2 different kinds of learning. There's acquisition and there's language learning, right? And I mentioned that 3 of our classes focus mainly on your acquisition style of learning. And one of them focuses mainly on your textbook language learning. That is this one. Our textbook language learning class is our EFL class, our English as a Foreign Language class. Now, this is focusing on developing a pupil's listening, speaking, reading, writing, and authentic environment skills, and doing so in a more structured, lesson-based format, okay? Aside from language learning, pupils will also experience integrated transdisciplinary learning across a variety of subjects and themes. What a fantastic word that is, transdisciplinary. That just is a fancy way of saying what I had said before, that being not only is a student going to be learning English, but they will also be hopefully learning some history and some science and some geography and some math and so on, whilst learning their English. Transdisciplinary simply means multiple disciplines, simply means lots of areas of study, of learning. Sorry, I got ahead of myself here. This is 45 minutes per lesson. This is 2 lessons per week, so it's less common. It's more so packed together in once a week format during term times. Because it is a little bit more intensive, it's not as relaxing of an environment as a reading class. So we don't want to overbear the children with constant like verbs, prepositional phrases, conjugate, Billy, conjugate 3 times a week, because that would burn them out pretty quick. Here is your slide here. And here is an example of a lesson that might be taught, for example. We use the Cambridge Global English books usually to teach these, and there's all sorts of books. So you can see here we've got Digital Learners book 4, 5 through 9. Each of them focus on different things. You can probably see by the pictures what each of these books is going to focus on with the language. But you might discuss famous buildings, right? So in this lesson, you might be learning something about architecture as well as the English. In this one, we're talking about shapes. So you might be learning something about trigonometry or geology. I'm an English teacher. It's also been an interesting day. So this is a much more sort of traditional, you might be more familiar with this from your English lessons that you took in school, for example. Or when I used to be back in Canada, this is what my French lessons used to look like. Oui, je m'appelle Blake. And here is an example of this one.
Now, I'm going to introduce partitives, okay? It's okay if you haven't heard this word before. It's a grammatical term, right? It's used to describe groups of something or what something is packaged in, right? So if we have bananas, we tend to say a bunch of bananas, right? That's what we tend to use, yeah? What do we do when we want in the morning for breakfast? If we wanted a bit of bread, what do we normally call that? Brian?
A slice of bread?
Yeah, a slice of. Great, so that's a partitive. A partitive denotes a part. It's about a part of the whole, right? So when we say in the morning, oh, I really want bread, we don't mean that we want the whole bread. We want some bread, or we want a slice of bread. Yeah?
Other examples of that might be a glass of milk, right? If somebody says, Mom, I want some milk, you're not going to throw the whole carton at them, right? You're going to pour them a glass because that's probably what they meant. Let's skip a little bit ahead in this lesson and see what else Andrea is talking about.
Food.
Track 11. Here we are, a bunch of bananas,
Oh, I like those small bananas. They're just the right size.
a bar of soap, and here's a jar of honey.
Okay.
We've got a tube of toothpaste, a carton of orange juice, and a loaf of bread.
A large loaf of bread, that's good.
A bottle of water,
Right.
and a slice of cake.
A slice of cake? Just one?
Yes, I thought I'd have it with my coffee. It's a lemon cake with fresh fruit.
Oh, okay. Anyway,
I got a can of cola and a packet of biscuits.
what sort of biscuits are they?
They've got fruit and nuts in them. I got a tin of tomatoes,
Good.
a box of chocolates.
A box of chocolates? Oh,
Yes, the ones I really like.
but we've got 2 boxes in the cupboard already.
And last but not least, a bag of potatoes.
Well done. That's everything on the list. And a few little treats just for you.
Right.
Let's go through.
Now, it's also worth noting that these videos we'll be sending to you after the presentation as well. So I'm going to, just because we're running out of time, I'm going to skip ahead now. But do please go and watch some of these lessons if you'd like to have a more detailed look at the type of teaching that your child would be experiencing, but I think you're starting to get a clear sense in this video of what the EFL class is all about. It's very much about textbook learning. Let's look at structure. Let's look at certain kinds of phrases. How do we put sentences together? So on and so forth. Oh, that music's going to be in my nightmares now. Okay, English literature and writing is our last class. This is one that is very special to me because this is my primary class that I teach. I have a master's degree in creative writing from Oxford, so creative writing has always been a big part of my life. And so English literature and writing is, I just call it creative writing class because the literature we're looking at is a work of creative writing, and the class really focuses on producing creative writing from your children. It's also a very workshop-based environment. I'll talk more about it in just a moment. But in this class, this is probably our most intensive class when it comes to utilizing the language, because at this level, we're hoping your children understand enough about language to actually put all those tools together now and create advanced stories with them. And if any of you are storytellers in the presentation right now, you'll know that in order to tell a compelling story, you need to be able to take a lot of different pieces and tools and put them together. You'll be using metaphors, you'll be using similes, you'll be using allusion, you'll be using foreshadowing, right? You'll be trying to work within a complex plot structure. But you'll see more of this in a bit. Again, these classes happen, there's 2 45-minute lessons per week. They're usually put together on the weekends. And they happen, there's 3 10-week-long terms throughout the year. So it's pretty consistent as well. And with my students, between terms, we also sometimes have contact, and I'll help the students with submitting stories for competitions, for example, or submitting essays for work patterns and so on and so forth. This is a more intimate classroom, usually about 3 to 5 people per room, because we spend, again, a lot of time discussing each other's writing and looking at each other's writing. So we want there to be a nice smaller classroom so that everybody can have time to shine. Here is the graph, but again, you will be able to see this graph after the class as well. Some of the books we have covered: A Wrinkle in Time, The Giver, Holes, The Tempest, The Jungle Book, and Wonder are 2 books that I'm currently teaching right now with 2 of my classes. It's a very engaging class because we are writing while reading. So every week there will typically be an assigned piece of writing that I want my students to do, and a section of the book that they must have read as well. That way, for the first 45-minute chunk of the lesson, we can discuss what we've read in the novel. And then for the second 45-minute section, we can actually practice what we have now studied from the novel. So if the chapter was very heavy on foreshadowing, for example, we might then in the second half of class learn a lesson about what foreshadowing is, practice it, and then I'll send them away that week with their assignment being write a story that utilizes foreshadowing. Okay, and here is a video. This one's much shorter, so we'll probably be able to get through the whole thing of this type of class. Oh, different music. Fantastic. Skip ahead a little bit. This is not the video that I thought it was. Yes, it is.
Right, so it's very important to have a real good character description. How can we do this? By using techniques to help us develop our character. Why would we do this? Really, to make stories interesting.
Pun on the 2 meanings of runny. So runny can also mean something soft, but it can also mean things, obviously, it has the word run in it, so it's talking about running. So it's a pun there, isn't it? And I think we all got that now. So I think this is a bit of a funny one for us to look at. So I just wanted us to learn this word pun and to realise that sometimes poems can be making jokes. It can be about humour.
I really liked that description of the rocks in your shoes, Connie, and the use of the word run. I think that's very unique and interesting. When I go to the desert, the rocks run in my shoes. The plot is ultimately the story, right? So if we look at Lizzie's story and we look for the plot in that, it was quite a clear plot, right? But you can't have a what without the who, the when, and the where. You need to have something for something to happen to. So a dog or a person, a character. You need to have somewhere that takes place, and you need to have a time frame. right? There is a sea dragon. All of these things are building up excitement in our heads. We're getting more and more and more and more information, right? And we know that eventually there's going to be a climax, right? In which Hiccup is probably going to have to defeat that sea dragon. We know that's coming.
We still have a conjunction, but it's a subordinating conjunction rather than a coordinating conjunction.
Oh, it's always a good day when you get to use the phrase subordinating and subordinating and compound conjunction. What a fun phrase to say. So as you can see, this class is very free-flowing. It's dependent on the teacher. You can see that with my types of lessons, I very much enjoy collaborative talking with the students. You can see that I actually put up a student's story. So when I mentioned earlier that we do a lot of workshopping in this course, it means that the students are actually reading each other's stories and giving comments on those stories. I feel very strongly with my background in creative writing that the best way to learn and improve with our writing is to do it often and to show it to your peers and get feedback. And then you can use that feedback. Right? So it's not just me, the teacher, giving feedback. Of course, I give lots of that as well every week, but I want the students as well to be giving feedback because that's going to activate a different part of their brains. They're going to be looking at someone else's story objectively and trying to figure out what do they like in this writing? What are things that they would like to use in their own writing? And so on and so forth. Not only do we look at books, we also look at poems, scripts, so on and so on. Oh, we're almost done here. So how do you choose which course you want your student to be taking? There are some tools we can use here. Again, these slides, you will have them at the end of the lesson. Someone has unmuted their microphone. Let me see if I can find out who that is. Mute them. I do not have the power to mute them, but perhaps Ming or Shirley can. Maybe. Well, I'm just going to keep going anyway, over top of it. So you can see on this, these are on the bottom here, the blue, green, and yellow boxes. You can see the courses we've actually talked about now. But on the top, you can see that big blue bar, which is one-on-one tuition. And then on the orange one, that is exam preparation. Now, today we focused on the 4 classes that we offer, the English Literature and Writing, the EFL, the intensive reading, and the guided reading, but we also offer one-on-one tuition. So if you have a child that needs something specific, or you just want your student to have some more one-on-one individual time per week, we do that as well. And we also do exam preparation, which, as you can imagine, is a much more focused type of tutorial, because we'll be working with your child with a very specific goal in mind, right? Maybe they're trying to prepare an exam for a college application or a high school application. So we will work with them to prepare them for that specific test. Yeah. So we have all kinds of things that are offered. We also have this mind map that can also help you perhaps, check where your student is. We will be giving this to you after the presentation so you can work your way through it. Does your student have a passion of reading and an ability to independently read? If yes, you have 2 choices you could go for. You could throw them in the intensive reading club, or you could make them study in an international school and they could do EFL, or they could do the writing class or whatever, right? If they don't, plop them in the guided reading club, and then we can help them foster a passion for reading, right? But again, these are things that you can go through on your own time. I hope you have enjoyed this little presentation. We are 1 minute over. We've done so well so far. Now I've just gone a little bit late. Everybody, please scan this code and join our chat group. This will be where you can ask any questions. If anybody has any questions right now, by all means, please ask away and I can answer them. But otherwise, if you think of any questions, if you wake up in the dead of night, I wish I had have asked this. No problem. Ask it in the chat. Okay, it's never too late. Also, if you have any questions about how do I pick what level my child is at, chat to us and we can absolutely have a conversation with you and help you figure it out. On some occasions, we can actually do a test lesson with your child, and we can help you decide what level your child's at. Okay, we are very organic about these kinds of things. And the goal at the end of the day is to help your child learn English in a way that is engaging, fun, and effective. Engaging, fun, and effective. Can you please talk more about literacy and creative writing? Of course I can, Bella. So in my creative writing class, the things that we'll be focusing on are if your child has no background in creative writing, I like to structure my classes to begin with around what I call the 5 W's, for example. What those are the who, what, when, where, and why of a story. So any story that your child has ever engaged in, whether it be a book, a movie, a play, a short story, whatever it might have been, will have these core elements, the who, what, when, where, why. Who is character, where and when is setting, what is plot, and why is theme. So we'll cover those 5 things first to sort of lay a groundwork. While covering those things, we'll be reading a story alongside it, and we'll be touching on, okay, how is this author focusing on the who? Let's look at the character. What traits do they have, right? How are they creating a compelling character? What are their wants? What is driving them forward in the narrative? Who is the protagonist? Who is the antagonist? If we're talking about plot, we're going to look at Freytag's pyramid, for example. So we're going to look at the pieces and the order of steps that you want your story to follow. It's got to have a clear introduction that introduces a character and a setting. It's got to have a very clear, exciting, inciting incident. I'll type that in the chat for you, Bella. Inciting incident, which is the moment of the story that kicks it into action, forces your protagonist off the couch, out into the world, on an adventure, so that there must be a story to follow it. An example of an inciting incident, if anyone is familiar with Harry Potter, for example, the moment that Harry receives the letter from Hogwarts in the post, that is a very clear example of an inciting incident, okay? Because if that letter never comes, there's no story. It's the moment that letter comes that Harry now has a question and a want, and he is going to act to find that want. So that's just a little taste, right? While reading the book and engaging with examples of these concepts, we will then practice them in our own writing. So an example of a character assignment I might give will be to give your child what I call a character interview. And so they will create a character in their own minds, but then they will interview them, like as if they were sitting across a table. What are they afraid of? What is their favorite food? What are places they've visited, right? So on and so forth. And it helps to sort of create this much rounder view of character and setting and story as a whole. We absolutely can do things that weren't in the slide, absolutely. The books that were posted on these slides are not the only books that we'll teach. They're just examples of stories we've taught. So as I say, if, for example, your child is really excited about a new book coming out from Philip Pullman or somebody, we can do that book. Maybe we can do that book next term, right? All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along and hearing me chitter chatter for an hour. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something. And I hope I see your kids soon in a class, and we can help them sort of teach or grow, learn, and develop their storytelling abilities. Okay? Thank you all very much for coming. I'm going to head off now. Bye now.